Hej och välkommen till detta webbinar från Time People Group. Tyvärr så hade vi ett litet problem med inspelningen första minuten så vi kommer hoppa rakt in. Men här har ni Dr. Erik Sklotins från Blekinge Tekniska Högskola och Continuous Everything. Varsågod och njut.
That you can polish the same feature 10 times every month, which gives you fewer features, but these features are really good because you have had the chance to polish them. And you need a bit of both. You need to add new features to your products, but more importantly, you need to make sure that you polish the features you have. So keep this in mind when you hear me talking about speed. So this continuous way of delivering software promises, this is exactly from a book, that your software releases are going to be effortless. You have by magnitude shorter feedback loop with the customers. You have continuous experimentation to find new features and many other benefits, which sounds too good to be true. What the books also say is that it's not for everyone. Not all customers want frequent upgrades. There's this infamous thing that your machine decides to upgrade right before an important meeting. We all have been there or seen that, so that's not something you want to experience with the business critical system. And it assumes that the whole organization is ready for transformation, but as we just saw in the poll, the organization is the hard part to change. So it's not easy. And what we see with working with the companies and talking about implementing CI/CD is that it's complex enough to build it in an empty place for a new product, but it's a huge undertaking to retrofit an existing product with a CI/CD pipeline, because it basically you have to rethink everything you do from scratch. And more importantly, you can't just automate everything, because when you automate something that's not efficient, you just multiply your waste. So it's a hard process of throwing things out, and a lot of them. And we see that customers want to work on their own pace and wish to plan for product upgrades, especially if they have integrations on top of the software you deliver and business dependencies. One of our partner companies brought up an interesting example that if you build a software that's business critical and the customer's business depends on a feature in your software, the customer definitely doesn't want that feature to change without notice if they want it at all. So that's a constraint. Also, organizations are not really ready to share their data or their end user data. They consider it as more as a risk than an opportunity. And to fully benefit from continuous software deliveries, you have to change your business model. And this is something that organizations don't like, because the existing business model is working, at least for now, and changing that takes a lot of confidence that there's more business after the change. So this leads us to the consequences that breaking down silos in the organizations is the major challenge. And organizations can still benefit from this way of working. It's just they have to pick parts that make the most sense for their domain, for your product, for your customers. And this adoption of continuous software engineering, it's not binary, it's a process. And at BTH, we look at this continuous software engineering from the costs and benefits perspective, like what your organization can get out of it, what are the benefits, and what are the associated investments, and how to maximize the benefits, and how to structure the adoption and identify low-hanging fruits. And to give an example is that everyone's talking about being data-driven, and for an engineer, it doesn't take a lot to implement some kind of data collection or telemetry. But it's all useless and waste if the product management is not ready to use that data. So it takes kind of a holistic view on the whole organization to see what might work and what might not work. Before I move on, do we have any questions so far?
No questions so far.
Good. So when we started this work, we wanted to know what's the state of the art. That's what researchers do. They read. And we tried to kind of build a perfect, idealistic CI/CD pipeline. We achieved that. Before I show you the full model, I'll show you the simplified model. Hello?
No, you're still with us, Eric, but we lost your presentation.
Sorry for this. I think my PowerPoint decided to upgrade.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. And let me restart it.
You're back.
What do you see?
I see the simplified model.
Yes. So this is the simplified model that can apply to every organization. Every software organization does planning in one way or another. Every software organization develops software and tests it. There's some process of getting that software into operation. Customers use this software and provide feedback, which in one way or another feeds back to planning. This might not be a very efficient, depending on the organization and the maturity and everything, but this applies to most. And these four boxes hint to four stakeholders, which is the first picture of the more complex and complete model. When we talk about continuous software deliveries, we consider four stakeholders. The first is engineering. This is where engineers live and breathe and develop and test their software. The second level is product planning, where the product managers make decisions of what to build and what qualities to add and so on. Level 3, it's operations. This is where software is used and made available to the end users. And finally, we have end users. These levels can be part of one organization if it's an internal product for internal users, or any other combination. That's not really important. What's important is that there are boundaries. And whenever there's a boundary, it takes some effort to cross it. And of course, with the continuous software engineering, we want to minimize this effort to cross the boundary. So everything starts with planning. In continuous software engineering, planning is short. The planning is lightweight and short, meaning that you make plans maybe for next week or next month, not next 5 years, and expect these plans to change and adjust to new inputs. These plans get delivered to engineering organization, where engineers build software, integrate it, test it, and does everything what engineers do until there is a release ready to be delivered. And this is an important difference between more traditional forms of development and continuous, is that instead of shelving a complete feature until a preset release date, the completed features are delivered immediately. And it might mean that there are multiple releases every day. They're just very small. And automation and process takes care of this happening with the click of a button. So once there is a release that is ready to be delivered to a customer, the customers get access to this through continuous delivery. And hopefully starts using the new features. And this is kind of crucial step because when you talk about delivering software continuously, it doesn't make sense to talk about delivering a release or charging customer for a release. The business models are more service oriented, and customers pay for using the software. So it's not just throwing a new software release off the wall and hope it works and get paid for it anyway. It's more closer collaboration with the customer, actually encouraging the customer to use your software, learning from the feedback, in establishing trust, which helps then with experimentation and getting more honest feedback. So this use of software generates data monitoring that allows you to understand what customers are doing and how their behavior changes as you evolve the product. And that input feeds back to continuous planning for the next planning cycle. And importantly, the faster you can complete this cycle, the faster you can make adjustments in the product and in your ways of working, and become faster at reacting to new developments in the market and new customer needs. In addition, there are a bunch of cross-cutting concerns. One that I like the most to illustrate the continuous everything is continuous budgeting. So there are many companies talking about being agile and being continuous and being fast to do things. And still, their budget committees meet once a quarter to assign resources to projects, which makes no sense if you can deliver software multiple times a day and still you have to wait until the next quarter to get resources to do something. And this suggests that the whole organization has to change and become continuous in their ways of working. If there is a market opportunity that has to be utilized now, there has to be means to get resources for that and support for from the rest of the organization. So with this model, we approached several companies and used this as a blueprint to understand what they have already implemented in their attempts to become better at delivering software, what they hope to deliver, and what works, what does not, where are the challenges. And to explain it, I'll use the simplified model again. What we saw is that adoption of continuous software engineering, or CI/CD, it always starts with the engineers trying to script and automate things. And of course, if you automate some tedious, repetitive task, that gives you huge gains in efficiency, more happy developers, and there are huge benefits immediately. What surprised us is that none of the companies we talked to even considered using feedback or use data in planning, simply because the organizations outside the engineering, that meaning that the planning, the product managers, and so on, were not convinced of the benefits. And it's really hard to there were not enough arguments to convince for the rest of the organization to change. What's also important that according to studies, the most benefits are with the continuous planning and using data in decision making. And there's a promise to develop new business models, new value streams, but that's kind of beyond current scope of the organizations we work with. And at the university, we are in the process of understanding this and making this more transparent to enable organizations to actually understand what they can get out of this and whether their investments are worth it. One thing we did, we tried to organize the challenges and opportunities in kind of hierarchy. This is a work we did together with Telia and Ericsson. One very important thing that sort of surprised me, and it said it to me immediately, is that doesn't matter what we plan for the future, we have to support the ongoing business models and or contracts. We can change whatever we want as long as we support our existing customers. Which makes total sense, but that kind of gets lost when you talk about all the benefits that might come sometimes in the future. And not all customers are ready for the change, meaning that at least for some time, the organization has to maintain multiple software delivery models. From there, well, once the support for existing products and business models is secure, the company can start thinking about automating things and making things more efficient internally. And large products contain multiple components or hundreds of components in there, like component level automation and solution level integration, where multiple component level pipelines join and integrate one final solution. That's levels 2 and 3. Then, and this is very big if that works out, then there's this opportunity of continuous solution delivery, which isn't really a technical challenge. It's more of a challenge to make sure customers want it. It doesn't disrupt customers. And the contracts support this, well, frequent deliveries of software, basically without warning. At these levels 2, 3, and 4, lots of data gets generated. Once you have some process automation in place, you can start measuring what's really going on, how quickly a test runs, how many errors release contain, and so on. Once you have continuous delivery in place, you can start measuring how customers react to it. And this all feeds into level 5. We can start using continuous feedback to fine-tune both your development process and the product itself. And finally, once you have all that data, you can start evolve your business models to become more data-driven. A perfect example of this, I think, is Amazon, that they are super focused on metrics and data and measure everything they do. And they understand very well their own internal process, which allows them to enter seemingly unrelated domains, like they were a bookstore, then a store for everything. And now I think that one of the biggest departments they have is the cloud computing, which seems unrelated. But if you think about this, it's the ability to quickly iterate software that then allows them to dominate these areas. So any questions so far, Leo?
Yes, we do have one question. from an anonymous attendee. What do you think would be a sensible start if you're starting to explore or adapt continuous development at your organization? Like, where would you begin? There's a question here: how do you get started to feel what would be right change without being too disruptive?
Good question. My next slide is exactly about this. But this is probably what I just said. It sounds good, but it's also very complex and too many moving parts to actually do anything. So a good place to start is to visualize where you are. If you are lost, then the best thing you can do is to find a map and locate yourself on the map. So again, I'm using my simplified model, but you can draw yours. Probably have more than just 4 steps. And there are steps in development and steps in planning. And you draw this kind of a diagram, and you can start measuring how much time does it take for each activity to happen, and how much time is spent in between activities. And I bet that for most, development and testing is least time-consuming activity in the flow. It's somewhere else. So data collection is kind of the first step. Once you have some data in place, you can start to map things. Like here's an example. What you can do is you can put on axis lead time and queue time, and see that, for example, step 1 looks like it's a really quick thing, that it's not a bottleneck. Probably it's good. Step 4 is, well, not that good, but also fine. But then there are a couple steps that probably would benefit from some automation or understanding what's going on, because they create bottlenecks. You can go in further. Instead of looking at just average values, you can look at inconsistencies. Like sometimes step 1 takes very little time, or most of the time it takes very little time, but then in some cases it actually takes a lot. So what's going on there? Why there's so much variability? You can start investigating to see how you can improve it. It's important because once you have a lot of variability, that creates a lot of unpredictability, meaning that it's not good if you say, yeah, testing this new release and getting it out to customers might take everywhere between 3 and 6 months. So that's not the good answer. So you look into it and see how to get more accurate and therefore increase control of the whole process. Once you have some data in place, you can analyze your delivery process. What seems to be, in what cases it works good? Maybe for smaller updates, everything is smoother. Large cross-cutting changes clogs everything, and it takes 5 departments to sign off the release, and it just takes forever. You can see where are the most pressing inefficiencies and automate what makes sense to automate. Sometimes the issues come from system architecture. You might need to restructure your teams and processes, see how you can parallelize work, empower teams to make decisions internally instead of waiting for some committee to decide something, and so on. Sometimes you might need to eliminate unnecessary steps. There was one example I like a lot, was that once you have automation in place and you use containers and deployment scripts, you can stop writing installation instructions. And so you get rid of tasks that nobody wants to do and takes a lot of time. You can just eliminate it. Sometimes you have to accept that things take time. Well, it might take 50 years to grow a tree, but you can plant a forest now and get it going. Or if your customers are not ready for CI/CD today, you don't want to wait until they start asking for it. You want to kind of lead their way. And this data collection, analysis, and adjustments, this is something you do continuously. There's this famous build, measure, learn loop. We can adapt it to, well, improve, measure, learn, and improve it further. And kind of repeat it until you, well, repeat it forever. One thing that is missing here is that we assume that speed is always better and faster is always better. What you should also look at is, like, does it really matter? Because at the end of the day, you want to make better decisions, be better at engineering, be better at providing great service to your customers, and you want your customers to enjoy your product even more. So this is where it becomes really hard, because there's no like one size fits all metrics or solutions. This is where each organization has to think how to measure these things and what really matters. Implement appropriate metrics, and at the end it looks like this. It's actually two build or improve, measure, and learn loops. One is for how to build. This is for your internal process, because on every iteration you get slightly better at what you do. But there's another loop that's connected, is what to build. It's what the features you build, the customer behavior you want to change. It kind of ties together, because how you build things enable what you can do, and new technology, new customer requirements demand new ways of building software. So you have to consider them both together. If this sounds interesting for you and your organization, we have a menu of options. Item number one is to have an inventory of what you already have. Most organizations already have something of what I just talked about, and to help you to decide what are the next steps. Usually it takes a workshop or two with the main stakeholders of your software delivery process, and a follow-up to discuss the results and see where to go from there. Menu item number two is an assessment of what you are already measuring and how to improve it further. That's a workshop or two to understand how to improve what you already have. This concludes my slides, and as Leo mentioned, I'll be happy to continue with more interactive questions and answers session.
Thank you so much, Erik. Super interesting. We actually have some questions. One is from Leif. You mentioned a couple of terms, solution, product, and component. Could you please define them? What do you mean by those terms? Solution, product, and component.
It's big products, big software products contain components. That's kind of sort of depends on what you're talking about. A product might be one component, and a product might be hundreds of components connected in different ways. So that's the basic structure.
Yep.
And so the reason for this distinction is that very often different components are built by different units in the same organization that might work in very different ways, or some components might be built by different organizations with completely different delivery modes and processes. So there's this need to, well, look at the component as one thing, and then have a second step where to think like how we can make these components to work together. sometimes it might not be an issue if it's the same organization, same process, all is good. But for large complex products like in telecommunications, this was an issue. So we had this separation.
Good. I hope that answers your question, Leif. We had one more question from Stefan. Do you see any risk in changing the team and the process continuously from an efficiency and cultural aspect?
Of course, there's a risk. There's always a risk. The question is it more risky to not do anything and remain where you are, given that the software is one of the fastest developing domains ever? Or it's more risky to actually try changing and exploring other options? And so what I'm suggesting here is there might be cases where all this is too much, too risky. But overall, what I'm proposing here is to look at data, look at metrics, and make small adjustments. And if I can go back to this slide, the faster you can improve something and get measurements back, the faster you can learn if that move was in the right direction. So you don't have to kind of make a disruptive change and then figure out, oh, it was wrong, everything's broken. You make small adjustments as you go, and the more frequently you can execute this loop, the more fine-grained the adjustments are. So yes, you might make mistakes, but those mistakes are also easy to correct because, well, the next cycle is coming tomorrow.
Leif got back to us. He was just asking if you could expand the solution compared to product and components. What do you mean by solution compared to a component?
Oh, okay. So I think a better word for a solution is offering, because customers very often doesn't buy software in a box. They buy an integrated thing, which is development process, maintenance services, service level agreements. It's kind of a whole package, which is software at the center, but there's a lot of things around it. Mm-hmm. It's how the software is delivered, how it's maintained, how it's upgraded, who operates it, training, and so on. So one unit of analysis is a component, which is a source code. Then there is a software product, which is still the software, but that's not enough for the customer to be happy. They have to have, the soft parts, also the other parts that belongs to the product, for them to actually benefit from it. So when you buy, for example, a new accounting system for your organization, you don't buy 100,000 lines of code. What you buy is training, installation, maintenance, and so on, which is not really software, but it's part of the deal.
Part of a bigger picture.
Yeah.
We have a question from Martin. Which customers, companies, and industries are most interested in adopting continuous improvement? Have you noticed any differences? Are there any businesses that don't seem as keen on?
So we have worked mostly with telecommunications companies, but I would like to say the following: everyone is interested in getting better at delivering software. It doesn't matter, big, small, telecommunications, entertainment industries. Everyone wants to get better. What's better is different. I think there are some studies suggesting that mission and safety critical software might not be suitable to be continuously delivered. Like, you don't want your pacemaker software to start upgrading without noticing or without warning you. Mm-hmm. So there are areas where it's not really applicable. And I can see that for core networking, core telecommunication systems, they'll probably never go like CI/CD by the book, but they can still implement some principles, at least internally, how they can become more efficient and better and understand themselves better to be able to still deliver twice a year the software to the end users. But so I would say there's not one. I can't highlight any areas or domains where this is irrelevant.
You mentioned that you were looking for partners for this project. Is there any industry you would like to see join that you're?
So if I can go back a bit. So we made this picture of hierarchy of challenges, opportunities, and this was intended as a map. Like a company can place themselves somewhere and see what the next steps could be. Most companies are somewhere between steps 1 and 2. I had a chance to work with Spotify, and I would say they are approaching level 5, but they are like an exception in this. I would be really interested in working with a company where I could see and study the transition from levels 2 and 3, maybe to level 4 and upwards. Because most studies and most discussions are like, yeah, some tests are difficult to automate and we have so much internal resistance. So it's not really about implementing CI/CD per se. It's more about how do we convince the organization to actually do anything. So if there would be a company that's really willing to go the full way, and that's actually flexible enough kind of to do it in a relatively short time, because the companies I have worked with, they are large, and every small change, it takes a lot of time. It just works that way, and there's a lot of internal things to consider. So if there would be a partner that's willing to go, at least for one project, one pipeline, go the whole way and kind of see the benefits and then decide whether that makes sense for them, that would be super interesting for me.
And what's the easiest way to? Is it just to reach out to you if you want to participate, or?
So the easiest way is to send me a message. I had my contacts somewhere on the slides.
Can I share this presentation with the audience afterwards?
Of course. So please send me a question or something, and we'll see what we can do.
Excellent. I would just like to say to the audience, if you want to, you have the ability to actually use your microphone. I know it can be very scary with online event with strangers, but just let me know in the chat and I will give you the ability to unmute yourself. But Eric, I had one question. You were mentioning earlier that you had some surprises. Did you have like an eureka moment where you felt like, oh, here we have something that's really important? Did you have that moment at any time?
So yeah, like there were many of them, and to highlight, so when you read the book about CI/CD, and actually some of the slides I have a reference to the book. It highlights as the automation or rethinking processes as the main challenge. But when talking with real companies, what we found is that no, kind of automating some tests, yes, that's not easy and it takes some time, but that's the least complex part. The more complex part is to go to a customer and say, hey, instead of 2 releases per year, which you control and can decide when to upgrade, we are going to upgrade anytime we want, and we're going to do it often. That's a conversation that nobody is ready to take, simply because when a software vendor starts or wishes to work continuously, everyone else around them has to work in somewhat same way. The customers have to be ready to accept software all the time and live with the new features. And that seemed to be the biggest obstacle.
So was that not in line with your thesis, or did you have a different theory coming into this? Or?
Well, I didn't really come with kind of a preconceived opinion on where the hard parts are. It just seemed to be that as long as changes are within the organization, they are, well, not easy, but they are on one level. Once you have to convince customers to do something, that's a whole new level of complex. Because companies really don't like to renegotiate contracts, because the moment you renegotiate a contract to the customer, it creates an opportunity for customer to consider other options, which is kind of thing nobody wants to.
And if we turn around, was there anything in your research that surprised your partners?
Excuse me?
Was there anything in what were your findings that surprised the partners or the customers that you were working with during this project?
I think when we showed this picture, and we asked, like, can you highlight things that you already have and highlight things that you would like to have? And everyone was like, oh, it's not just throwing software across the wall. It's actually a loop that something should come back to us. And that was apparently interesting or new for them. And I heard an interesting interesting anecdote that that was a long time ago for a company that builds some expensive software for telecom domain, that they had delivered the software and the hardware for the customer. And it's a big project. It was really expensive for the customer and a big thing for the vendor. And they deliver it. It's like physically deliver boxes of hardware and all, and nothing comes back. And of course, the sales representatives want to know, like, is the customer happy, or what can we do more? And is there an option for to sell something else? So it's complete silence. And finally, it was 6 months later, they send a representative to meet with the customer and to actually see what's going on. And it turns out they haven't even unpacked the boxes, which kind of illustrates the challenge of getting data back. And for this particular organization, if you imagine that they spend years building that software, and then years to hear back, then this improvement cycle, it's too slow for any meaningful improvements. So they have to be much better at hearing back from the customers.
Do you know how they decided to tackle that specific challenge?
Well, I get a word that it's much better now. This is an old anecdote. But they are on their way to become faster.
Good. Excellent. I think if there's not any further questions, I don't think there's been any coming in. You mentioned, first of all, thank you, Eric. Excellent presentation. Very interesting to hear about your work. Especially like the steps you were showing, like where to begin. And I think it's also an excellent opportunity that you can take part with these workshops. So if you don't have anything to add, I'm going to say a big thank you to you, and I'm going to say a big thank you to our audience here today. So any last words of wisdom that you want to leave us with?
Well, thank you for this opportunity to be here, and please reach out to me if you have any further questions. And a few weeks later, there will be a roundtable discussion. I guess it's open to everyone, where we can go into more specific details of what we can do.
Excellent. Yeah, like I mentioned before, you will be joined by your colleagues who are going to do the upcoming talks, and very much looking forward to talking to you then. And hopefully, our audience will have more questions for you and things
Yeah.
to
Yeah. Yeah. One last thing.
Mhm.
This continuous everything, continuous software engineering. It's an overarching concept. So somewhere in this loop, there is management of technical debt. Somewhere here is test automation. Somewhere here is digital transformation. And so this kind of ties everything together into one coherent model.
Mm.
So it's not like I'm doing one thing and my colleagues are doing something completely isolated. We are talking to each other and kind of trying to tie things together.
Mm.
So I think it would be very interesting kind of to have this roundtable where
Mm.
we actually put together the questions and what we do in our individual areas into kind of one bigger picture.
Yeah, very much looking forward to it.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you, Dan.
Thank you so much, Alex. And again, thank you to the audience for joining us. And hopefully, I will see you next week. Take care.